it take to save and store a flag more than 200 years? And what will it take to make sure it survives another few hundred more? We're joined by the person in charge of flag curation at the Smithsonian Museum, Jennifer Jones. And that collection includes the Star-Spangled Banner, the flag that inspired America's national anthem. Jennifer picks up the story when the preservation of that flag started.
In 1998 was when we started the major preservation project for the flag. We took the flag down out of its former location in the large flag hall in American history because we realized that it was very dirty and that it was in desperate need of some tender, loving care by our conservation department. And at that time, we undertook a multi-million-dollar project to remove the old backing on the flag, which had been put on it in about 1912, and to clean it and to do a really thorough examination of the flag, as well as understand what was happening to this almost 200-year-old textile and this flag.
It's kind of amazing that we still have it, isn't it, at all, that it's still around?
It is. In fact, many flags from the early part of the 19th century don't exist any longer. There are a number out there, but given the significance of this flag itself, the fact that it was raised and used over Fort McHenry from 1813 to probably a little after the Battle of Baltimore in 1814, and that the Armistead family had it in its possession from the Battle of Baltimore up until it was lent to the National Museum in 1907. The fact that the family kept it, they'd fly it, they would get people interested in having it for special occasions, and the fact that it was souvenired. And by that I mean little pieces were cut away and given to prominent individuals over the lifetime of the Armistead family having it in their possession. It is, in fact, interesting that so much of it still exists. We lost about 8 feet off of the end of the flag because of its use as a flag. I'm sure you as a military family understand, flags that fly often get what we call the fly edge, gets tattered. And protocol now, today that we know, deems that used flags should be ceremonially retired. And that means they're usually cut into small strips and burned. But that code didn't exist in the 19th century. And so its fragility as well as its significance allowed for it to have little pieces and little fragments cut away, and that the family kept it as a cherished treasure was helpful to us being able to see it
and
today.
What was the connection of the family to Baltimore and to the battle? Was there a direct connection?
So the George Armistead was commander of Fort McHenry. He became the commander of Fort McHenry in late 1812, 1813, during the War of 1812. He was the commander at the time of the Battle of Baltimore. And he had actually, in 1813, commissioned Mary Pickersgill, who was a flag maker in Baltimore, to make 2 flags, one of which is the oversized garrison flag, which is the flag that we have at the National Museum of American History, and which is the larger of the 2 flags that were flown over Fort McHenry after the Battle of Baltimore. and there was a storm flag as well. The storm flag has never been found. We don't know what happened to it, whether it was given away, souvenired, or just retired, and has been lost to history. But the larger of the two flags was the one that was raised over Fort McHenry after the Battle of Baltimore, and for which Francis Scott Key saw from the ship in the harbor where he was being held during the battle, and which inspired him to write those words that then became our national anthem.
It's such an incredible story. And one of the things that you mentioned is that about 8 feet of the flag is missing, has been cut off or was worn, or whatever has happened really over the last 200 years. It's important for folks that are learning about this for the first time to understand just how big this flag is, though. And so I'm wondering, I have a hard time keeping things organized in my household, Jennifer. I can't imagine having a flag this size. I mean, for the family to keep this flag, it's not an easy flag to store. I mean, how big is this flag?
It's over 30. It's 30 by 42. So when its original size was 30 feet. So it's 30 feet high by 42 feet
And
wide.
I'm actually standing here. You can't see me. I'm putting my hand up because I'm thinking, okay, that's like, that would make me almost, I don't know, 9 feet. Okay. So even folded, the flag takes up a really big space. Do we have any?
It does. It was about, what was the poundage? It was 150 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
Without the backing. It's funny, we have a storage bag, like for the military, it's like a B bag, an overseas bag, that the flag would have been stuffed into. And it's about 5.5 to 6 feet long. It just looks like a naval storage bag, and that's how they stored flags. They would, they didn't fold them up. They probably just sort of, gently folded it and stuffed it into this bag. And so to me, what's amazing is that flag actually fit into that bag, because knowing size and whatever, the thing is, it's a very loose, and this is what people don't realize, it's a very loose woven fabric, and it's made from, believe it or not, British wool. Even though we're at war with Britain during the War of 1812, and we're fighting for our independence once again from Britain, we have British wool. This flag is made from British wool, and cotton in the stars and linen on the hoist edge, which is how it would have been raised up over that flagpole. And so it's very loose weave, and people were like, well, we don't understand what that means. And it's just, when you think about flags are meant to fly. They're meant to be lofted by the wind. And having a heavy fabric wouldn't allow for a light breeze to raise that flag up and for it to actually fly in the breeze. And so the loose weave allows for the air to loft it, so that you can see it flying. Otherwise, it would be very heavy. It would take a lot of wind, and a lot of wind would do a lot of damage.
Well, so, it's a great reminder of what sort of material we were using during that time, because we're so used to these high performance fabrics that we're wearing or using, and even flag production these days, that I think it's difficult for us to think back to some of these more basic materials that would be used at the time.
Yep. And it was hand stitched. So it took Mary Pickersgill, who was the flag maker, and 5 or 6 young women, her daughter, her nieces, and a young African-American indentured servant. They were all teenagers, from the ages of 13 to about 15, who helped her sew these flags. And so she was teaching that profession to another generation, but she also had an African-American indentured servant who was working on it as
So
well.
you mentioned that some of the flag was given away as a souvenir over the years. And then I also read that one full star, that there were 15 stars on the flag at the time, that one full star had been cut away. And do we know
Yeah,
anything about what happened
yeah.
to that star?
We don't. What we know from Mary Pickersgill's diary, from Georgiana Armistead. Georgiana was George Armistead's daughter. She was actually born at Fort McHenry. And so when George Armistead died in 1818, he left the flag to his wife. His wife died in 1861, and she left the flag not to her son, but to her daughter. And so Georgiana was the caretaker of the flag at that time. She writes in her letters to George Preble, who was one of the commanders during the War of 1812. He and his son were prominent historians. He would go around and take the flag and lecture about American history and the War of 1812 and the significance of the flag. She wrote to him that the star was given away to an important official. That's all we know. She took the identity of that person to her grave. She never wrote down or indicated to whom that star was given.
How big was that star? If
the star is 2 feet across,
so it's big
from point to
yeah.
point. From every point, yeah, the stars are very large. It's deceiving when you see the flag in the chamber to really understand how big it really is. In the exhibition gallery at the American History Museum, we have what is a lucite star that you can touch, so you can feel how big the star is from point to point, and from any point to any point, it's about 2 feet. It's between 22 and 24 inches
I just
across.
want people to know, in case they stumble upon something in an antique market.
That's right. That's right. Or if they find it in their home or in a
right.
box somewhere.
If you find a random 2 feet star that looks a little bit worn,
That's
just
right.
be sure. We call Jennifer. That's what we're all going to do. So what is the condition of the flag as it stands right now?
So the flag is in a preservation chamber, which is part of our exhibition. So the visual wall of glass that when you come to the museum, you can see the flag through. The chamber that it resides in is actually a preservation chamber. It is kept at a very low percentage of oxygen, and oxygen, so it's high nitrogen. It's about 13.8% oxygen levels, and it's pretty much in the dark. That's for continued preservation. The flag is very fragile. As any textile that's almost 200 years old that's been used the way it was used over a period of a year or two, the wool is very fragile. In many places, the fibers are fractured, but because it's in the preservation chamber in the low oxygen environment, that actually helps with the continued preservation, hopefully for another couple hundred years. And light is the worst damaging element to a textile such as the flag. So there's no photography allowed in the gallery, and we don't allow, when crews come in, they can't use lights and things like that. Everything is controlled by the museum. And so it's hopefully we will have it for another 200 years based on what we have been able to clean off all of the environmental materials and to help stabilize it in the condition that it's in right now.
And so is the end goal just to keep the status quo, or is there continual care of the flag, or
we will continue every couple of years. We will go in and examine it. There is no restoration of the flag. We're not trying to make it look like it looked when it was new. what we're trying to do is preserve what still exists and to keep the status quo so that it does not deteriorate further.
I mean,
so that is
it's a national treasure. I mean, it's an amazing thing to have for the nation, and what amazing work to be part of, Jennifer, just to make sure that future generations can hear the story and then see it, because seeing it is something completely different. And I hope that we all have the opportunity to see it in person. What's been the sort of the most fascinating thing for you being part of the process and understanding, bits and pieces of the story of this flag?
So one of the things that's most amazing to me is every flag has a story. And as a curator, one of the things that I love to do is watch people discover how we've presented things. And so people ask a lot about, what does the flag mean to you? How do you feel about the flag? To me, every person brings their own story and their own history and their own understanding to that object. And what we're trying to do and to see and inspire is people learning more about our history as a nation and how our ideals and our ideas as a nation are embodied into that object and all flags. And what really I love to see, and I was down in the space right before Flag Day, just going in and cleaning the glass before we had press coming in, and I had a group of young students come through who didn't know I was in the gallery and had not anticipated meeting a curator, come through, and they looked at the first stanza of what is our national anthem, which is projected onto the back wall near the flag, and they started singing the national anthem. And to me, that was just such a great moment. And hopefully we inspire, more people to be inspired by what they see and to go back and try and understand the connection between our flag and our anthem, and to go back and dig further into our history so that they can be better informed Americans.
I could get a little teary-eyed thinking about that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really emotional to think about those kids just doing that.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the great parts of, my job is, seeing them spontaneously just be inspired to go ahead and sing our national anthem. So it's a good part of the job.
And it's a tribute to the hard work that's being done and has been done to preserve the flag, to be the catalyst for that sort of emotion, even from the youngest citizens, because they were clearly moved by it as well. When we began this conversation, you said you started your work sort of thinking about service to the country and what motivates people to serve. And I'm curious, just as we wrap up here, over the years, if you think back to that point where you started to the point you're at now, have you found an answer to the question about why people decide to serve, or their feelings about serving America in different capacities?
People recognize how fragile our freedoms are, and they're the ones that decide that they're going to protect the ideals that our founders set out to establish in the new nation, and that those things are worth serving for and defending. And so it's those people that we all have to thank every day, because everything that we do and everything that we are as a nation is thanks to them. And so I would like to thank all of those who put on the uniform and have throughout history, because we are who we are today because of those who've come before us.
That was so well said, Jennifer. And I can't help but think of the flag that you just described as well as an interesting symbol of that, because here this flag is big and powerful and beautiful, but it's fragile, and without care, it it may disappear, and that's what the work of the Smithsonian has been about caring for that flag. But in a similar way, what you're saying is there are also caretakers around this country that are doing the very same for the nation. And it's an interesting
correct.
parallel to think about. I've learned so much. I really appreciate this, Jennifer, more than you know. I feel much more informed, and I'm going to be on the lookout for that star. I have a feeling one of us is going to find, it's going to be somewhere. We're going to figure it out. We're on the mission. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jenna. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. We love sharing these stories with you, but we also love hearing from you as well. If you have any story ideas or feedback, you can email us info@smarternews.com or direct message us as well on social media. We read every single message. We love providing quick, concise, nonpartisan news for you on a regular basis. News when it matters and why it matters. A refuge from the storm. We are Smarter News. I'm Jenna. I hope you have a great day.